Welcome to the Unstoppable Podcast, episode number 27 with Allan Kleynhans. My name is Dan J. Gregory, and I am committed to hunting down the secrets of business mastery and human performance. My goal for the Unstoppable Podcast is to share insights from some of the most successful entrepreneurs, inspiring thought leaders, world-class athletes, and prominent celebrities to help you to become unstoppable in business and life. Each week I'll be bringing you a new interview with an inspiring person and sharing my own results as I pursue the answers to the question, how can I create the ultimate edge in my business, make a significant impact, and live an extraordinary life? Welcome to episode 27 of the Unstoppable Podcast. If you've been following the show recently, you will know that I've just returned from cycling in the Alps, having racked up a total of just under 400 kilometers over 4 days of riding. The journey started in Innsbruck and we finished up down in Verona within Italy, having cycled through the Alps and explored Lake Garda. It was an incredible trip. But having been back for less than 48 hours, today I'm actually moving house. But I found time to create an extraordinary episode with a very dear friend of mine. I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Mr. Allan Kleynhans. Allan Kleynhans is a highly sought-after expert speaker, peak performance coach, and trainer. He is passionate about the subject of self-esteem and the psychology of success, and he loves inspiring and empowering others to create new levels of self-awareness and peak performance in all areas of their life. Allan has been studying the science of human behavior and peak performance since 1988, and he is a recognized authority on the dynamics of human potential and self-esteem. Specializing in peak performance training, coaching, and consulting for individuals, athletes, teams, and corporations, Allan has been helping his clients to create extraordinary results both personally and professionally since 2001. He has coached and worked with people from all walks of life, including high-performing business owners, financial traders, and sports personalities, including members of the Sharks and Springbok rugby teams in South Africa. Allan has also studied and worked with some of the biggest names in the personal development industry, such as Anthony Robbins, the late Jim Rohn, Deepak Chopra, Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, Tom Hopkins, Bob Proctor, Randy Gage, Robin Banks, John Cahill, and the Landmark Education Forum. Allan is an articulate, moving, and inspiring speaker with a real passion for people and a pure desire to make a difference. Allan is extremely passionate about his message, and he regularly facilitates public and corporate seminars, keynotes, and workshops on personal and emotional mastery and the psychology of heart-centered leadership. However, more recently, Allan has been working with other speakers to enhance their speaking abilities and maximize the impact of their message. If you're an aspiring speaker, you will absolutely love this episode. Today, you will learn from Allan's own experiences and his story of personal transformation, and you will discover how to become a master speaker and learn how to share your message with the world. I'm proud to introduce my good friend, Mr. Allan Kleynhans. Welcome to Allan. I'm absolutely delighted to bring Allan to the Unstoppable Podcast. I've known Allan now for just over 4 years. We met for the first time whilst supporting one of Tony Robbins' events in London, and we were just speaking offline about how it'd been a while since Tony had been to the UK. So it was a great environment because it's such a big event, and had a pleasure of working alongside Allan and seeing him in action with some of the leadership work that he does with the Anthony Robbins organization. And we've become close friends and associates ever since. So delighted to have you on the show, Allan. Welcome.
Dan, thanks, buddy, for having me, man. I'm excited to be here with you.
Cool. So, Allan, I know we've just introduced you offline, but would you mind giving the listeners a little bit of a frame about who you are and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. I speak. So what I do is I speak full time, and I've been doing that for 14 years, and I do some coaching, but speaking is my main passion, and I've done a lot of training. And I do a lot of training in terms of in a corporate environment. I've done a lot of sales training, leadership training, customer service training, and stuff on communication. And as you mentioned, Tony Robbins, I'm a Tony Robbins trainer. And you and I met back in 2012, which was a fantastic year because he had been away for a long time and then came back to the UK after a long gap from being in Europe. And as you say, we've been great friends since then. And but yeah, I mean, you know that I love to speak, and that's my main passion. And I speak wherever I can, get the opportunity to speak, and wherever I'm invited to speak. And I speak mainly about becoming your own, becoming someone who's a leader, and how you show up more powerfully in the world, etc., and how you can make more of a difference to everyone you meet.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing your introduction. So I'd like to take a bit of a delve back into the past now and find out a bit about your beginnings. I know that you spent some time out in Angola. Would you mind sharing your entrepreneurial beginnings and how things got started for you in life?
Yeah, sure. My entrepreneurial beginnings started a long time after Angola, but I say a long time, probably 2-3 years after. But you mentioned Angola. I was there as a soldier, and I grew up in South Africa, and I was an only child, and I went to 2 schools. The second one was a boarding school. My father was a very strict disciplinarian, and decided that boarding school would be a good thing for me. I wasn't much into academics. I wasn't academically minded, but I enjoyed sport, and I was always quite, physically able, and always been, into health and sport, etc. And I think that was my saving grace, because it was an expensive school, and I just made it through academically. But in terms of what I did there in terms of sports, which was what I enjoyed the most about it. And I think that's what kept me there, because I was one of those boys who was a bit of a rebel, and always was breaking the rules, etc., and getting caught for bunking out and doing things that I wasn't supposed to be doing, and I was on the brink of being expelled a couple of times. But when I got to the age of 18 and I finished school, I had a letter in the post, and it was about my intake to the army. And at the time, the army was compulsory in South Africa, so if you didn't go to university, then you had to go to the army. Those were the 2 options available to young boys at that age, at that time in South Africa. It's changed obviously since then, and now it's voluntary. But it was it was interesting 2 years, and I spent 7 months of that 2 years in Angola. And prior to that 7 months, I'd been trained in all kinds of different disciplines, etc., and I was posted all over the country to different places. But the last 7 months of my 2-year stint in the army was spent in Angola, which was a really tough time. And it was during the height of the civil war in Angola, and it was interesting because of the fact that South Africa wasn't supposed to be there at the time because of the Geneva Convention, and we were there on a top secret mission. We were sent up there. It was about 6,000 of us, and we were kind of at war for 7 months, just about every other day. Mechanized infantry, tanks, thousands of vehicles, millions, hundreds of millions of South African rand spent on ammunition, and it was a Cuban. We were up against Cubans and Russians, and that were funding the what we called FAPLA, which was the Federated Angolan Liberation Army of the people of Angola out there. So it was a pretty messed up situation, and spending 7 months there, and our very first contact we had, I lost 3-4 mates. One of them died a little while later after while I was giving him a blood transfusion. And we were currently, at that time, I remember I was having some blood pumped from my arm into his arm, and I looked up and there was a MiG-27 flew over us and dropped a bomb,
My goodness.
About a couple 100 meters away. And it was crazy, non-stop gunfire. It was incessant noise, just deafening noise, mortars going off all the time. And for that period of time, the whole time it was just living in like a constant state of anxiety and fear, really. And that was fascinating because I look back and I think, a lot of people, fear is an interesting thing. And I think there wasn't a man alive in that situation who wouldn't admit to being completely fearful,
Yes.
Because it's a life and death situation, and you got guys dying left and right of you. And, coming home from that, looking back at it, I spent, several years just trying to deal with what I'd been through, and had lots of nightmares about it. And it was, but thankfully what it led to was my desire to understand how my mind was working.
Yes.
And, it was a tough time, and it's something that I've spoken to quite a few guys about who had been in that kind of situation. Actually, funny enough, I've just taken on a new guy in terms of like a mentoring. It's not really coaching, but it's just somebody that who was in the same kind of situation, but for a lot longer than I was. It was special forces in South Africa. Yeah. And we were just talking about that experience just yesterday. Wow. And, what it means to somebody and how it affects people,
It must be so traumatic, though, that most people would never even, you talk about fear, and I'd like to come back to talk more about fear because it impacts, when you're in life or death, that's where fear is meant to be activated and triggered.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people are experiencing different types of fear, but they've probably never been to that depth of fear that you've experienced. It must have been such a traumatic situation.
Yeah, very. I mean, one thing I do remember is that, you get a lot of time, a lot of guys out there at the time, they had you had upset stomach all the time, right? Because your body is just freaking out.
Stress.
And you get such a high sense of terror, and you're on full alert all the time. But there's at times when you were just, while we were in combat and combat situations where you're just operating on unconscious, because you're so trained and also it's a situation of, doing whatever you need to do in order to stay alive. But going through the motions, and it's a weird situation because I remember being in two states of mind at the same time. Like one state of mind is like, WTF, what the hell's going on here, right?
Yeah.
Like this is crazy, right? And the other state of mind is like, okay, cool, mortars, just and going through the motions. I was a patrol mortarist, so I would have to carry a short mortar pipe, and I was always carrying at least 12 mortars on me at any time. So I was carrying at least 25 kilos all the time. I remember when I came out of the army, I had extremely strong legs because I had spent the previous 7 months in Angola in really thick sand, and carrying like at least 25 kilos, 12 mortar bombs, like eight ammo cases, for my R4 weapon, which is very similar to an AK-47.
Yes.
It was just crazy. And, we spent a lot of time moving around the bush in these big 6-wheeler vehicles, which are called rattles. And, these are massive vehicles with the 20 mil cannon on top and an anti-air gun at the back and carries 10 troops. And obviously we had tanks and all kinds of other vehicles, and water was always being brought in because there wasn't a lot of water there. So we had to bring water in these big water trucks, and we would get water rations, and we'd have to make sure that you'd ration out your water, so you made sure you never ran out of water. Because if you ran out of water, you're pretty much stuffed, right? Extremely hot weather, like 45 degrees, in the shade, and extremely high humidity, and lots of bugs and snakes. I remember we even lost somebody to a snake. A snake fell out of a tree. One of the tanks was going through the bush. There were no roads there and everything, so all our tanks had to actually make the roads for us, and we were constantly playing cat and mouse with this enemy, and there were 25,000. Apparently, our reconnaissance had, told us that there was a force of 25,000. They were camped in different areas all around Angola over a vast area, a couple of 100 square miles. And we were just playing cat and mouse, for 7 months, moving through the bush. And then every time we would have combat, and we were also being hunted by MiG-27s.
Goodness me.
Enemy aeroplanes. So every time there were enemy planes above us, we would have to pull into the bush and sit still and wait for the plane to disappear. And so it was a crazy time. It was really nuts.
I mean, I've had so many conversations with people on this podcast about fear, and it's such a different level. So What was life like for you when you finally came out of that situation?
It was really tough because coming back to civilian life, virtually, it was only literally 2 weeks. 2 weeks I was in Angola, and 2 weeks later I was at home and I was out. And in that 2 week period, I had been to rehabilitation because we were sent to rehabilitation to talk to psychologists and psychiatrists, etc., about what we had experienced. And we went through a whole process of that for 3, 4, 5 days. And then we were back to our camp in South Africa, and then we got our medals, and then we had our finishing parade, and we were out, and I was at home 2 weeks later, and literally 12 days after I got home, I think I got home on the 12th of December. 14 days after that, I turned 21.
Wow!
On the 26th of December, and I remember sitting with my parents on my birthday, and we were having a little barbecue, just the three of us, and I was having a beer with my dad, and we didn't talk much, obviously they were glad to have me home, but I was in my head a lot. And I was just glad to be sitting in South Africa in the sunshine, drinking a cold beer and thinking, thank God I survived that. And also wondering all the time how I did survive that. But what came after that was a flood of guilt. And I think that's what I was talking to this guy recently, this guy who's also special forces. And, he said this suffered the same thing. And it's the same for a lot of guys that I've spoken to who have been in a situation like that, whether they're ex-police personnel or ex-military. People who have been in combat, if they've lost mates in that situation, and they come back, then it's usually the guilt complex is like, how come I'm alive and my mates didn't make it? Why am I so special that I'm alive? And do I deserve to be alive? And that's combined with the words I'm going to use now for myself is a mild curiosity, which is probably, I could use more colorful language for that, I'm sure, but which is a fascination or a curiosity with what people are complaining about, in civilian life. When you come back to it after you've spent like 7 months in that kind of situation, which is like kind of living in hell. And it's deafening noise all the time, and people are, constantly dying left, right. Now you come back to civilian life, and people are complaining about the fact that, someone cut them up in the traffic, or the weather's too good, it's raining, or, and you just think, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
if only you just, life is so easy, if you just
Perspective.
It is. It's all about perspective. But what followed after that is I began to drink a lot, and because I was just I started having nightmares, so I started drinking, and I drank every day for the longest time. And I think it was at least probably about 6-7 months before a friend of mine actually said to me, who had been in the same operation as me actually, and I bumped into him, and we lived very close in the same neighborhood. We both lived in blocks in a block of flats very close to each other. Mm-hmm. And he said he was a great reader, and he had lots of books on his bookshelf, and he had his own little flat at that time already. And we bumped into each other when I was going to the bottle store, because what I would do every day is I would go to the liquor store and get some alcohol, and I would drink, until I would pass out, so I didn't have any nightmares. And my parents obviously were freaking out. Much later on, I discovered they were obviously very stressed, which I was oblivious to the fact I was putting them through a lot of stress. I was just locked in my own little world.
Yes.
But he was the one who introduced me to psychology, and he said, and self-development. And he said, hey, listen, you need to read. He said, this book has really helped me. And he said, take this book and read it. And it was Think and Grow Rich. And that was July of 1988.
Wow.
And so I took it and I read it. But he gave me some great instructions, and I've always read a book ever since in the same way. He said to me, you want to read this book as if the author is sitting opposite the table from you, and he's telling you the story.
Wow.
That's how you want to read it, with that kind of fascination. And he said, make notes, feel free to make notes on the side of the pages, or find a book and make some notes and refer back to the book. And he said, anytime you're feeling like you're going down that dark rabbit hole again, he said, just, pull out the book and read it, or think of what you read in the book, or recite something to yourself, or come up with a phrase that will help you to alleviate that darkness, And so that was my first introduction. But what it did, it reminded me of a book that my father had made me read 4 years prior to that. 4 or 5 years prior to that, when I was about 15 or 16, he told me to read How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Wow.
And so I reread that book again, but this time I actually enjoyed it. The first time I read it, I just read it because my dad told me to read it.
Yeah.
And I don't even think I read the whole thing properly. I just skim read it. But when I read it again, I thought, wow, what a great book, So and then very soon after that, he told me to read as many books as I could on his shelf, which is what I did over the subsequent 2.5 years before I left South Africa to come to London. I read just about every book I could get my hands on his shelf, and he had a couple of 100 books at least.
Wow.
And I read the first 3 books I read that he told me was Think and Grow Rich, Mind Power by John Kehoe, and You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. And I began to practice, what I read in that book. And then he gave me a cassette tape by Brian Tracy. And I remember I started listening to Brian Tracy near the end of 1988, and on the psychology of personal achievement, I think it was called.
Yes.
And he used to say in that cassette tape, Brian Tracy used to say, listen, your self-esteem is directly related to your level of success in life. People with the highest self-esteem are always the ones who usually succeed, and people are very popular and have lots of friends and healthy and live longer, etc. And he said, I remember the very first exercise I tried to, I say tried because I wasn't successful in actually executing the exercise. But he said, stand in front of the mirror and look in the mirror and say, I like myself. So I stood in front of the mirror and I couldn't do it.
Oh, gosh.
Because my self-esteem was so low.
Wow.
And I just couldn't do it, and I tried for ages, to do that. And eventually, I managed to start doing it, but it was much longer, much later. But eventually I started doing it. It felt very uncomfortable, but I just kept doing it. But that was my very first introduction to personal development, and I loved it. I fell in love with what I was reading. I thought, wow, this stuff is great. Why don't they teach us this in school? If I'd come across this information at 8 or 9 or 10 years of age, I'd be a very different person right now.
So I guess getting that Think and Grow Rich book then was a real defining moment in terms of the direction that your life has taken ever since that moment.
Yes, it was the beginning of the beginning, I think, because before that, because when I came out of the army, I had a lot of money in my bank account, because when you go into the army, you open a bank account and then you get paid every month, and I was always away on an operation of some kind. Whether they were mock operations or whether I was down in Cape Town during the 1986 riots, or whether I was in Namibia on the border or whatever. And when I came out of the army, I had all this money in the bank, and I'd been paid danger pay while I was in Angola, and I proceeded to drink my money away slowly but surely. But when I read Think and Grow Rich, it was the first time that I'd ever heard any discussion or had a discussion about turning ideas into tangible assets or creating wealth. And Think and Grow Rich is a lot of stuff on wealth, but there's also a lot of stuff on just, being successful in all endeavors, really, and how to take your ideas and turn them into tangible assets. And that was the very first introduction. So I became very, very excited when I read that book. And I read it 3 times, actually, in a very short space of time. And I remember it made me so excited that I actually couldn't sleep. And I was having severe mood swings. I was obviously dealing with what I was going through and all this guilt. And I was very angry, and I was drinking a lot. And I was also smoking a lot of marijuana. And I started taking other drugs, harder drugs, and I was very unhappy. But this book kind of ignited something in me, and I began to think, wow, this is great. If I could take what I'm learning in this book and begin to apply it, then I could actually, my life could actually take on a new meaning. It could, at some stage in the future. It was very vague. It wasn't. I didn't form a very clear picture at that time, but it was the beginning of the beginning for me. I thought, wow, if I could get more of this kind of information, I think perhaps, I could turn things around for myself. I could get to a place where I could learn how to be happy again.
Wow. So what came next then, in terms of, obviously you came to London, and when did you start your kind of career? How did it transition from those moments where you began your journey of self-development?
Yeah, I think the next major turning point for me was when I was in London. I'd been here for about 4 years, and it was 1994, I remember. And a friend of mine invited me to a talk and said, listen, there's someone doing a presentation. It was a Tuesday evening, I remember. And this person said, there's someone doing a presentation in Paddington at the Hilton Hotel in Paddington near the station. And you should come and check it out. So I said, okay, cool. And I only went. The only reason I went is because the person that invited me was hot. And it was a female, and I was fancying my chances there. So I only went. I thought, well, it's going to give me a chance to spend time with her. So I went to this talk, but from the moment this person started talking, I was hooked. And I thought, wow, this is fascinating. And that was an introduction. That evening was an introduction to the Landmark Forum.
Oh, yes.
And I immediately signed up for the forum that night. And I enrolled on the forum. And then shortly after that, a couple of months after that, I was on the forum. It was a 4.5 day weekend. So it's like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then a Tuesday evening. I'm not sure if it's still structured like that, but that's how it was structured then. And then on the Tuesday evening, what you do is you come back on the Tuesday evening, and they encourage you to invite people, your friends, and who have And by that stage, I mean, it was I think it was 24 hours after the weekend was over, roughly. 24 to 36 hours later, but that weekend had such a massive impact on me that I actually arrived on the Tuesday evening with at least 15 of my friends.
Wow.
None of whom enrolled on the course, because obviously that Tuesday evening is about enrollment.
Yeah.
But they were able to. Definitely did notice a change in me over the course of that weekend. And that Tuesday evening, I stood up and I gave a testimonial. I remember it was quite an emotional testimonial about what I'd been through over the weekend. But it was a great introduction to personal development and the next step for me, I think. And then I went on and did the advanced course 2 years later in 1996, and then that advanced course was the first time that Angola resurfaced for me, and I had suppressed it, and it resurfaced, but I refused to deal with it, so I just pressed it down again. But I was reading right through the 90s. From the time I arrived in London, the first book I bought in 1990 when I arrived in London was Unlimited Power by Tony Robbins. That was my first introduction to Tony. And I bought 2 cassette tapes. And that was also my very first introduction to neuro-linguistic programming. And I'd never heard of NLP before. And I bought this book, Unlimited Power. I read the back cover. It sounded interesting. And Tony talks about NLP in Unlimited Power. And I thought it was a fantastic book. So I was reading right through the 90s, and I got involved in Landmark, as I say, and then I went through the whole curriculum through the 90s. And then in 1998, I took Landmark. I was very keen to take Landmark to South Africa. And I thought this would be a great technology, a great education for South Africa, because it's all. Have you done Landmark?
I haven't done that. No.
Yeah, it is a really good. It's a great program, and I still recommend it to people today. I think and I've got a lot of friends who have done it. But in 1998, I thought, wow, this would be so good for South Africa. Just in terms of what was going on in South Africa and the Truth and Reconciliation program that was happening in the country at the time, and. So I got together with a couple of other South Africans here in London who I'd met through Landmark, and I said, hey, listen, guys, why don't we, let's set up a forum in South Africa, and we did, and we ran we encouraged, we got one of the top forum leaders to come out to South Africa, and we had like 300 people in the room in Cape Town. It was life transforming for myself and everyone who was involved and everyone who was in the room, and so I was very proud of the fact that I helped to establish Landmark there in South Africa, and it's gone on from strength to strength. But I think the next turning point for me was in 1999. Massive turning point for me that's when I did my very first live seminar with Tony Robbins, and it was 1999, and I was at a very tough place in my life. I was very unhappy. I was broke. I was living on my mate's couch. I was working 80 hours a week. I was earning £30 an hour at Credit Suisse, or at the time £25 an hour at Credit Suisse First Boston. And I was working every spare hour I could every week, maximum overtime. Yeah. And I was making great money, but I was broke, and I was using cocaine every day just to get through the day because I was so unhappy and suicidal. Wow. And I was frustrated because I had all this knowledge, Dan. I'd been reading all these books, and I'd been to quite a few workshops by that stage. And I used to go hang out at St. James's Church in Piccadilly and listen to as many people as I could, Yeah. And they used to have a lot of great speakers coming through London at that time. And but I was frustrated because the knowledge was in my head. It was intellectual, but I wasn't actually living it. I wasn't doing anything with it. And right. I was living a life that I had long since grown tired of, where I was just, using drugs on a regular basis and hanging out in toxic environments, had toxic relationships, and which none of it was serving me. And I had this dream that I wanted to be happy. I just thought, hey, you know what? I'm sure I could be happy, and I'm sure I could actually have a great life. And I didn't really know how to go about it. And then I went to UPW. In Cardiff, which is Unleash Your Power Within, as you know. Yes. And Tony's flagship program. It was my first time I'd seen Tony Robbins live, and it just had a major effect on me, a major impact on my life. And I actually was fortunate to have a one-on-one with Tony, an intervention with Tony during that weekend. And in those days, if any of your listeners are listening to this, anyone who's listening who's been to UPW, who's seen Tony live, they'll know that he runs massive workshops now. He's got like at least 5,000-6,000 people in a room at one time, and sometimes a whole lot more. But in those days, it was only, there must have been about, if there were 2,000, it was a lot. But I would say it's probably about 1,700 people there. Yes. Because I remember looking around and thinking, wow, there's a lot of people here, right? There's at least 1,000 people here. And, maybe even 1,500 people. But there wasn't more than 2,000. And he used to take a lot of, he would do a lot of shares and that after Dickens, and you've done the Dickens process, and we're not going to talk about that here. And people are probably wondering what that is if they don't know what it is, but we'll leave it for people to experience that in person. Yes. But after that process, I don't know how it happened, but suddenly the mic was in my hand and I was talking to him, and next minute he started asking me questions, and before I knew it, we were having this conversation, and I was talking about Angola, and it was just crazy. And then next minute, I remember. Emotionally, I was so moving between so many emotions, and before I knew it, I was feeling like relieved. There was like a massive sense of relief, like I'd really let go of a massive weight. Wow. And I just felt I was overcome with amazing gratitude, and I started expressing how grateful I was for him and for what he had done for me, over the preceding 45 minutes. And also I was expressing my gratitude for what I had got from his book and his cassette tapes, and how at some of the darkest times in the 90s, I used to contemplate suicide, but then I would put his cassette tape and I would listen to his voice. And that had saved me a lot during the 90s, many times. And I started expressing this gratitude for him, and I was very emotional. I was crying at the time, etc. And next minute, he jumped off the stage and he came running towards me, and I ran towards him, and I ended up in his arms,
Yeah.
And then he put me down and he grabbed my head and he said, and this was I'll never forget this experience. And even just talking about it now, it's quite incredible. But he put me down, because I'd wrap myself around him like a monkey, because he's a big guy, right? Yeah. 6'7", and And he put me down, he grabbed my head and he looked into my eyes and he said, listen, he said, it's time to release the past, right? Take the lessons and use them to empower yourself and empower other people. And he said, the most important thing for you right now, he said to me, and he said, it's time for you to be loved, right? It's time to let love back into your heart. And he was like, it was like he was just pouring it into me through his eyes.
Wow, I can imagine.
And it was an incredible experience. I mean, I've never felt anything like it. And then he said, now turn around and let these people love you. And I turned around and there were just 1,500, 2,000 people on their feet. And you've been in that kind of environment yourself. You know what it's like when you watch an intervention.
Yes, I've seen
it.
And
the love hit me like a Mack truck. And it just, I even almost fell over. And he was like standing behind me. And then that was an amazing experience. And when I went back to my life on the Monday, I rode back to London because it was down in Cardiff. And I remember I rode out there on my motorcycle, and I remember riding back on my motorcycle the whole way back. And inside my helmet, I was just saying the incantation, I am the voice. Now I am the voice, over and over. And when I got back to London, I just wrote down everything I was going to change and everything I was no longer committed to and everything I was committed to. And then I just went back to my environment where I used to frequent, all my old buddies that I used to hang out with, and doing things that I was tired of doing now for a long time. Number one was taking drugs. At a long time, I kept telling myself, I need to stop taking drugs and I need to get clean. And I was just, doing that for years. I remember I started smoking marijuana at 14, and now I was in my 30s and I was still taking drugs. And now I was doing it on a daily basis. And now it included drugs like cocaine and ecstasy regularly. And I was just tired of it. I was unhappy. I was unhealthy. I wasn't working out at the time. And that weekend changed everything for me. And I just wrote everything down. And I went back to my environment and I told my buddies what I was going to do. And I told them that they wouldn't see me for a long time. And they needed to give me some space, because there were certain things I wanted to do. And I'd been telling some of them about what I wanted to do, and how I was into personal development. They knew about it and how I wanted to become a speaker. And my initial desire to become a speaker was started when I did Landmark, and I saw the Landmark forum leader. And I thought, wow, I would love to do what that guy's doing. And now it was 5 years later. And I still wasn't doing it. I was completely unhappy. And that weekend was a major turning point, because the following year after that weekend, I got clean immediately. I stopped hanging out in those environments. And 13 months later, my life looked so different. I was now working at I moved from Credit Suisse to Citibank. I was earning more money per hour. Now I was on 30 or 35 pounds an hour. I was working 4 days on, 4 days off. And in those 4 days off, I was just studying, and I was just starting to share my story and looking for places where I could actually grow, And I was actively working on the information that I'd studied, and I was practicing what I'd learned in UPW. And 13 months later, I'd paid off all my debt. I had money in the bank, and my life was completely different. I started hanging around with new people. I was going to the Yes Group in London every single month. I'd made new friends. Life was so different, and I was in a completely different state emotionally. It was like I was a different person altogether. People who knew me from my past, they just couldn't. When they bumped into me after that, they some of them found it hard to recognize me. They couldn't. They said, "Wow, it's you're like two different people," And I think the most important thing I got from that was just that actually, one day I could be happy again. I could really just heal that experience, and that was the beginning of that healing. And as you know, I went right through the whole leadership program, and I went through the mastery program, and I didn't have the money at the time, but I found it, and I'm so glad I did, because it made such a difference to my life, and what's happened since then has just gone from strength to strength. And then what I did was I made a decision that I wanted to I was going to start speaking. So I looked for an opportunity to speak, and the first opportunity I was given was actually at the London Yes Group. And I gave my very first talk there, and I remember I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I didn't know what I was doing really. I just really spoke from my heart. I had no real structure or anything like that, and I was all over the place. But the audience seemed to love it, and obviously I told some of my story. And then I thought, okay, cool. I enjoyed it so much, and that was also I think it was a great moment for me, because I remember when I was 14 at boarding school, I was asked by my teacher to give a talk in front of the whole school, and I didn't want to do it, and she made me do it. And I was obviously one of the boys who was chosen. There were 12 boys chosen from different years, and I was 14. I just arrived at this boarding school. I'd only been there for 6 weeks, and she chose me. And I was a tiny guy with low self-esteem, and I hated every minute of it. And I thought, I will never, ever do that again. And now I was, many years later, and I gave this talk in front of that's about 400 people at the S Group that night. And they used to get great numbers back then. And I thought, wow, I love that experience. That was amazing. So then I thought, you know what, I'm going to learn how to do this properly. And this is what I'm going to do. This is going to be my commitment. This is going to be my choice of vocation. And very shortly after that, I went back to South Africa, and I went from strength to strength. I built a massive speaking business and a training business, and I did lots of great training for, corporate training for massive brands, some of the world's biggest brands that were based in South Africa. Ended up working with the Natal Sharks rugby team for a whole season, and then that led to some work with the Springboks, and it just was amazing. And it was a fantastic journey, and it's been a fascinating journey ever since, and I've met some amazing people. I mean, obviously going to UPW, meeting people like yourself, and you and I, we could rattle off a whole bunch of names between us, people that we met through that environment, which has been a real blessing. Absolutely. And I'm sure you would agree with me. And just when you start hanging around in that kind of environment and you start doing the kind of work that we're doing, that you and I are both doing, which is empowering other people, through your own story, it's amazing where life goes, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And from that moment then, when you actually gave that speech at the S Group, how long have you been speaking for now? You've been speaking for...
that was 15 years ago.
Wow.
So that was in 2000. And I remember in 2002, that was in 2001 I gave that speech. And then 2002, so about 14 years. In 2002, I gave my first talk in South Africa, and my first paid talk. I remember I got a check for my first paid talk. And I'd given a number of free talks before that in South Africa in different environments. I mean, the first thing I did, I arrived back in South Africa, and I started going to, because I wanted to go back to South Africa. I'd been away for a long time. So the reason I decided to go back was I'd been away for 12 years. I'd been through all these programs, and I thought, it's time to go home and spend some time with my parents. They haven't seen me for a long time. And also, I felt that it would be a good step for me to go home and do some healing for myself, right? Because when I left South Africa in 1990, I left, feeling, with this massive guilt that I had about being in Angola. What I did, unfortunately, I had to kill lots of people. It was rough. So I ran away from South Africa, and I thought I'll never go back there. And now it was 12 years later, and I had this massive transformation. I thought, what, I'd love to go back to South Africa, and I'd love to be part of the transition that's taking place there. I'm sure there must be lots of my buddies who have never got over what we went through, and subsequently I worked with a lot of them, and I rekindled some of those friendships that with the guys that I'd spent in my platoon, who were in my platoon in Angola, etc., and in my company. And I told them what I was doing, and I told them my own experience, and I shared some of the stuff that I'd studied, etc. And I shared some of the NLP that I'd studied, and it made a big difference. And I worked with some of my buddies who were ex-police personnel and ex-military personnel, it was so rewarding for me. And so I made the decision I was going to go back there, and it was brilliant, and I remember getting my first check for my first paid talk. And I thought, wow, 800 Rand, right? It was only 800 Rand, but it was, I didn't want to take that check because it was a small community of people. And I just said, listen, why don't you just make it out to a charity of your choice or my choice? And they said, no, we want you to have it because we really want you to feel that we really value your time here, etc. And I said, okay, thank you. I'm going to take it, and I'm going to donate this 800 Rand to a charity of my choice, and which I did. I donated it to an AIDS orphanage. But I remember getting that check thinking, wow, this is my first paid talk, right? And then that was it was probably about February or March of 2002. And then I remember in 2004, 2 years later, I remember I made R1 million in 1 month.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, wow, R1 million. Now, R1 million is it's not, I mean, if you convert it to any other currency, it's not a lot of money considering the current exchange rate of South Africa. The economy is very poor at the moment. But having R1 million in South Africa is like having £1 million in England or $1 million in America.
Wow.
Because R1 million, you know what I mean? Jesus, that stuff goes far in South Africa. And I remember thinking, wow, R1 million in 1 month. And I remember when I got back to South Africa in 2001, November 2001, and I began to lay my plans. And the first thing I did when I arrived there is I seeked out the speakers who were currently based in South Africa and who were operating in South Africa. And I went to listen to them speak, in different environments. And I did whatever I could to get in front of the speakers. I listened to what they were speaking about. And I thought, okay, good. They're all based in Johannesburg. No one's doing this in Durban. And obviously Durban, where I'm from, and people say, well, Johannesburg's where the money is. And I thought, well, Durban, there's lots of money in Durban too. And that's where I'm from. And I'm going to operate from Durban. That's where I'm going to start. I've grew up there. That's where I'm going to operate from. And I remember 2 years later when I made R1 million in 1 month, and by now I had developed some relationships and established relationships in the training industry. And I was part of a we started to talk about forming an association of professional speakers in South Africa. At the time, there wasn't an association like that, and there wasn't a coaching association out there like that either. So I started forming relationships, and we started forming groups where we could come together and discuss the future of South Africa in terms of speaking and coaching in the country. And I remember some of the people that had developed these relationships with who were doing the same thing as me, and all of them said to me, "Jesus, how did you make R1 million in 1 month?" And I just said, well, I'm on a mission, and I think it's about wanting to make a real difference and wanting to add real value and not buying into, beliefs and paradigms, And I said, all of you have got a paradigm about how much money people will spend in South Africa. And I said, I don't have that paradigm here. I think that, people will pay for something if they find there's value. And true enough, people paid for my programs, and they were, at the time, I remember thinking, well, it's a lot more than other people are charging, but no one else is going to be doing what I'm doing, because I've got that international exposure. I had been trained all around the world, and I'd been living abroad, and at the time in South Africa it was very new. It was only just starting out. South Africa is usually always 20 or 50 years behind the rest of the world. So although this was a big thing in the UK and in America, personal development and going to workshops and etc. In the South Africa, it was fairly new. So it was a fantastic time I had, and I spent 7 years there, and it was great. And then in 2008, I decided to come back to the UK and go international. And I've spoken in different countries now, and it's fantastic. I love doing what I do, and I mean, you love doing what you do, and we're in the same industry. And it's a great industry because people are hungry for knowledge these days. Hungry for the right kind of knowledge that's going to make a difference. And as well as the infrastructure or the processes, so they can implement that knowledge. And so that it actually shows a result in their life. And they want that sooner rather than later. So to be able to offer that kind of knowledge and that kind of expertise, etc., is a blessing, really.
I think one of the key things, actually, Alan, is we spoke early on at the beginning about fear and how. Many people, like you're saying, the day-to-day living that most people have, and a lot of the fears that people have that hold them back, and the limiting beliefs that hold them back, are usually formed from a very different environment to the environment that you experienced in Angola and subsequent to that in terms of your own challenges. But I think what I respect about what you've done is, you took some deliberate steps to overcome those challenges. And I think for anyone who's listening to the podcast, you don't have to have been to war to take action to heal some of your own internal wounds, I guess would be one way of putting it. And I think what you've managed to do is take your inverted commas mess and make it your message. You've been able to transform your circumstances into a powerful career, a speaking career, and really develop and hone your own message through the personal development you've been through, but then into your own speaking career, and then refine that message based upon your own experiences. I think that's so powerful, and a huge respect to what you've done there. But I think, as I was saying with the listeners here, it's about taking action on those things that are holding you back.
Yeah, you
don't have to have been to war to have that kind of experience.
I would agree with you on that, definitely. And I say that often to people. I say, and also when I'm doing my talks, I say, listen, obviously, you don't have to have been to war. You don't have to have been in a situation in Angola like I was. But everybody every day is fighting their own battle in their head.
Which actually might seem like a war to some people.
Exactly, yeah, it does. I mean, some people they do. It seems like they are at war, especially if they're having challenges in their relationships at home, or with their kids, or with their in their business or whatever. And at the time, people can seem like they are experiencing their own version of hell. But I would agree with you. It's just about looking at that situation. I like what you said there, right? Turning a mess into a message. I've heard that before. It's a great little phrase. And a friend of mine used to say the same thing to me. In a very successful businesswoman in South Africa. She said, you got to take your tests and turn them into a testimony, And so I think, and every day we all tested, and tests come in different shapes and forms. Some people will come in a broken relationship or in bankruptcy, and other people it's going to war, So it doesn't really matter what the test look like. It's not the context that makes the difference. It's really what you do with it, that makes the difference. It's how you interpret it and what kind of meaning you give to it, And
I think some of the decisions, that moment where you decided the things that you were going to commit to and the things that you were going to commit not to doing at the same time were some powerful decisions that you made in that moment.
Yeah.
So let's move on now. So you've obviously had a highly successful speaking career over the last 14 years. How does someone go about starting their own speaking career?
Well, the first thing is if somebody is just starting out, they're going to say, right, what's my message? What is it I want to talk about? Because it's a massive industry and it's very, very competitive, and there's loads of people talking on loads of different topics. So someone's going to say, well, what's my message? And and what's my target market? Where do I want to speak? Because you'll get people who want to speak on the stage and sell from the stage. You get people who only want to speak in a corporate environment. You get people who want to do keynotes. Some people want to do training. There's so many variations. But I think got to get a core message, and you look at what's my target market, and then work on the delivery of that and what's it going to look like. How's that? What's the structure of that talk? And then it's just a case of getting out there and saying, right, where can I deliver this talk? And in the beginning, I think all speakers, a lot of people don't like to speak for free. I don't mind speaking for free, and I still speak for free. But when I say for free, there's usually some kind of value engagement or value swap, right?
Yes.
So, but in the beginning, if you were starting out as a speaker, then you're going to speak for free, because nobody's going to pay you to speak if you're starting out and you haven't really established yourself, or you're not known as a speaker yet. And usually that's going to come with practice, and when people start paying you, it's because you've got people will refer you happily, or they've heard of you, etc. Or you've developed some kind of message, etc. And then you can go into a corporate environment. Perhaps if you take corporate environment as one example, and you can give people you can show them what your experience is. You can tell them who you've spoken for before, etc. And you tell them what kind of value you're going to be imparting, and how it's going to make a difference to their workforce. Then you can start charging for that kind of stuff. But in the beginning, all speakers, there's nothing wrong with speaking for free. And you take all the greatest speakers in the world, all of them at the beginning of their career, they spoke for free. They spoke wherever they could. I remember when I started speaking, I would speak wherever I could. I would speak at Rotary meetings. I would speak at Lion Club meetings. I would speak at any kind of meeting. I remember even speaking at a Rotary meeting for, and they looked like everybody in this Rotary meeting was, must have been over 80, and some of them were falling asleep in their chair, etc. But it was a great opportunity for me to practice what I was speaking about and to practice engaging with the audience. So you speak wherever you can in the beginning, because what you want to do is you want to develop your message, and you want to develop the ability to deliver it in a way where it actually, it engages the audience, right? And it gets them thinking, and also it empowers them to take some kind of action. That's the beginning of anybody's speaking career, really, is, develop your message, find out what your core audience is, what your target audience, and then you got to just get out there and practice it and practice it and practice it.
And then how does someone go about start commanding fees for their work once they've kind of honed their message a little bit and they're clear on who they want to work with? How do they start to get paid work?
And that's a great question, because if you look now how the speaking industry has changed so much now in the last 10 years, right? Because now you get a lot of events where you get a variety of speakers, right? A multi-speaker event, and what they will do is a lot of those speakers are actually paying to be on that stage if it's a big stage, and then they're sharing some of their profit with the organizer, the event organizer, and they're selling from the stage. So they're actually not getting paid to speak there. But if you take the opposite end of the spectrum, you take people who are doing keynotes in a corporate environment, they're actually getting paid to be to speak at that event. So a company will pay that person to come in and speak to them about a specific subject to their employees, and they'll often pay for their flight. So, I've been flown all over the place. It was just great. You get your flight paid for, your hotel paid for, and then you get paid, and you also usually get paid in advance. So, I remember, a lot of my talks. What I do is I'll get paid before I even arrive. It's got to be paid before I even arrive there. But that's a different environment, and that it takes a lot of hard graft to get into that kind of environment where you're going to be speaking in a corporate environment. You've got to be a very good speaker, and you've got to have a great message, and you've got to have something that's actionable and something that has obviously benefit for the client. And then you've just got to get out there and do whatever you can to get that first paid speaking engagement. And a lot of the time, it just comes from people who know you. So people say, it's not. People say it's not what you do; it's who you know. But it's not. That's not entirely true these days. It's who knows you, right?
Yeah.
Because you can know lots of great people, but unless somebody knows you, right, you often won't get that call. And if people know you, and you've impacted them in some way, and they're happy to refer you to somebody, usually all it takes is just a referral sometimes. And that's how you can often lead to your first paid gig. And when you get that first paid gig under the belt, then that breeds confidence, obviously. But it's just a case of picking up the phone. I think in the beginning, all I did was I just picked up the phone. I went to as many meetings as I could. I arranged as many meetings as I could. I networked wherever I could. And whenever I met somebody who was working in a big corporate environment, I remember one of the first big corporate environments I had for Forbes out in South Africa. I met somebody who worked there, and I became friends with them. I developed a relationship, etc. And then I said, listen, I would love to come and speak at your company. Do you guys ever hire speakers? And she said, I think we've had people come in the past to speak about various subjects, etc., different things. We don't do it often. And I said, well, who would be the best person? And then it's about finding the best person and then developing that relationship and then saying, listen, can I come and have a meeting with you? And I would always arrange face-to-face meetings. These days, we operate very differently, don't we, with the digital world. But I do prefer face-to-face meetings. I know we're doing this by using digital technology right now, but and it's working very well. However, I'm that kind of person where I would actually prefer to sit down face-to-face across the table from someone and get to know them and let them get to know me, so they can see what they're going to be getting especially if we're discussing the subject of me coming to speak to their corporate environment or coming to speak to their employees. And usually the people who are handling those kinds of things are in HR. So, it's about finding the right people, connecting with them, and just, picking up the phone, sitting in front of people, going to network meetings, networking with the right kind of people, and then hoping that one day someone's going to say, hey, listen, that person is a great person. They've got a great energy, etc. Perhaps you should talk to them. And it's just having that belief, I think. There's lots of procedures and lots of processes. But again, end of the day, it's got to be backed up with a drive and a determination and a belief that it's going to happen. That, I believe I'm going to be a speaker. I believe that I'm going to be a paid speaker. I believe it's going to happen one day, and just hustling and hustling and hustling to make that happen. And then eventually your breaks come.
Awesome. And I mean, there's a couple of things you mentioned during your response about, corporations are looking for specific results. And
yes.
I think, if your message matches that specific result, then that's going to put you in a good, favorable position. And I think the second thing you mentioned really is about, once you've refined your message, it's about refining the delivery. I think, a corporation or, a major event provider will be looking for someone who can deliver the result, but they also look for someone who creates a lasting impact. And the way that's achieved is through the delivery of the message. In fact, you could even deliver a relatively general result, but if you deliver it in such a way that blows away the audience, you'll always be the one that gets remembered. So
yes.
What is it that makes someone a great speaker when it comes to maximizing the power of their message?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a question I ask myself regularly because when you watch great speakers, and I've been watching great speakers for a long time now, and I watch how they operate on the stage and how they interact with the audience, and I think I'm always asking, what makes this person so amazing? I mean, when I watched Tony Robbins for the first time, I thought, wow, and I'd seen quite a few people speak before then. And that was in 1999, and I saw him for the first time. I thought, gee whiz, this guy is extraordinary. I mean, he's just the level of energy, the level of presence, the awareness, the ability to be completely in the moment, and real, and transparent, I would say, to a degree, because you've got to be, in the moment, present, transparent, and just be able to bare your soul. And I think when I watch a lot of people speak now, and I go to a lot of events, and I speak at, if I speak at an event where there's more than one speaker, and I watch the other speakers, and I think what people are challenged, a lot of speakers are challenged by the ability that they can't actually be themselves in front of that audience. What they're doing is they're putting something on instead of just being themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they're not being authentic.
Yeah. And authentic is a word now that a lot of people are throwing around, etc. And hey, you got to be authentic and authenticity, etc. But authentic just means being real, right?
Yeah.
And being real means you're not afraid to bare your soul, and that means you and a great speaker. To answer that question, I know we're going about it in a long way, but you say what makes a really great speaker? There's a lot of things. It's the way they use their voice. It's the intensity. It's there's a certain energy about them when they show up in front of people. Let's take some really big, great names that everyone will know. You take someone like a Martin Luther King or a JFK or Earl Nightingale or a Jim Rohn or Gandhi, famous people, Mandela, and people who have become great speakers, Oprah, etc. There's a vulnerability about them. At the same time, they're very aware of what their role or what they're doing, right? They're very aware of who they are and what their message is, and they're intense with that. And at the same time, there's also a love there. You get a sense of the fact they care about you. They care about the people who are listening. And it's often been said that nobody really cares what you say, but it's about how you make them feel, right?
Mm.
So it's quite difficult to answer that question, I think, because there's so many things that come into it. But what really makes a great speaker? It's how they show up on that stage, I think. And I think when I coach and I do some work with some speakers, and the feedback I'll usually give people is like, if there's something that you need to clear from your past, if there's something that I always tell, and I say, what's going to make you even more impactful on the stage, and one is going to make you even more powerful on the stage, is if you've made your peace with yourself about everything in your life. And that can be quite difficult because we always, there's always stuff, right? It's like peeling an onion. However, if you're not afraid to stand up there and say, you know what, this is who I am, and this is my message, and I believe in this message emphatically, I've got a lot of conviction, and it's always about conviction. I heard that word the other night, and somebody said to me, you've got a lot of conviction. I gave a talk the other night in Wimbledon. There was about 40 or 50 people in the room, etc., and they're all property people. And afterwards, I had a number of them come up to me afterwards, and one of the people said, you've got a lot of conviction about your message. It really, and I said, yeah, I have, because I believe it. Because I'm not just saying that. I'm not here just to say that because it's just to pass time. I really believe that if you take what I'm telling you and you apply it, you're going to get the results, right? Because it works. So yeah, it's belief in the message, conviction, presence. Presence is a good one, I think. Presence. When someone's in front of you, a speaker is always going to be focusing on the audience. What's in it for the audience? What's in it for the audience? And a lot of speakers they go internal. They'll change between external, internal. And you can see when someone goes internal. And when they go internal, it breaks the rapport they have with the audience,
So they're thinking about themselves as opposed to the audience.
Yeah, they might not even be thinking about themselves. They might even just be thinking about what I'm going to say next.
Yes.
Or what's coming next, or is this coming out right? Or how does it sound? You can't be thinking about that. You got to take care of all of that before you even get to the stage. When you're on the stage, it's just about delivering that message and doing it in a way that really first of all you develop rapport with the audience, obviously, but you got to be completely present, and you just got to be there's got to be a lot of conviction there, a lot of belief in your message, and there's got to be a lot of love there. I use the word love a lot because I think, you've definitely got to have a lot of love for your audience because in these days you hear a term a lot in our industry now is like bums on seats, right?
Yeah.
And I read a little rant from a friend of mine online the other day, and I had to chuckle, and I agree with him totally. He said, listen, if you're a speaker, and he's also a speaker trainer, and he's done a lot of work with Tony. He's one of Tony's top trainers back in the day, but he's gone on his own now. And I won't mention his name because he's a lovely guy. But he said something the other day. He said, if you're thinking of people, delegates, as bums on seats, he said, really, you should get into a different income bracket, right? You should change your job because he said, because the people, when you start thinking of people as bums on seats, then you've kind of lost it. You've got to think of these people. These are people, right? And they're looking for something. They're hungry for something that's going to change their life. And if they kind of come to your event, that's how you got to look at them. These are people. They're not bums on seats. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And I agree with that. It's because, and that's where love comes in. It's like, whenever I walk into a room, before I start speaking, I'm at the back of the room. Before I get on the stage, I look at the room and I put my arms around the room energetically. And energetically, I hug that room and I pour a lot of love into those people before I even get on that stage. So when I get on the stage, they feel me before they even hear me, And I think that's what makes a great speaker is like you feel them before you even hear them,
I think
you feel them.
I think that's really powerful, and it's such good advice because whenever I've seen yourself speak, Allan, it's always highly emotionalized. But I think where the conviction comes from when I've seen you speak, it's from having total certainty in your message, but also at the same time allowing yourself to be vulnerable, allowing yourself to share your own pains, allowing you to share your own stories of transformation. I think when you see the speakers that aren't able to captivate people emotionally, it's when they don't allow themselves to be at that level of vulnerability that they can share their own challenges, their own pains.
Yes.
And it's
you're right. I think and vulnerability is an interesting one, because whenever we feel vulnerable, we think we look weak, but other people think we look courageous. That's the paradox of vulnerability. And you said something else too, which leads me to think of something, is that, the person who's on the stage is the person on the stage. The speaker is leading the audience, right? And it's like an emotional roller coaster, and people want to be entertained as well as educated. And also we are emotional human beings. And whenever we go to a movie, watch a great movie, we love the mix of emotions, right? In a great movie, you have a mix of emotions. 1 minute you're laughing, next minute you're crying. Next minute you tense, next minute it's suspense, and then it's fear, and then it's, and that's a great movie. It takes you on an emotional roller coaster, and that's what a great speaker really should do, is take people on an emotional roller coaster and get them to places emotionally that they haven't been before, because that's when you think about things that you haven't thought about before, and that's when you make decisions that you haven't made before. And that ability to be vulnerable, I would agree with you. It's that's why I say it's about making peace with yourself and being okay with bearing your soul. And some of the greatest speakers I've ever seen are people who are just, you feel them, as I said before, you hear them. There's just like an energy about them, and they share their message with conviction, and they're happy to share their highs and their lows. A lot of speakers these days, they only talk about the great stuff. They won't really talk about the mistakes they made. But I think you get a lot of connection with the audience. The audience also is happy to hear about your mistakes too, right? Because they know, they want to hear that you're a human being. Nobody wants to listen to somebody who's perfect. It creates a gap between the audience and the speaker. A speaker is also a human being, and there's a lot that goes into it. I think it's quite a difficult question to answer, I think.
Well, there's some great points. I think the other thing I observed from seeing many different speakers myself, and something again I would certainly attribute to yourself, and even in this podcast, the interview today, is that the ability to tell great stories in rich detail.
Yes.
Just thinking back over what we talked about at the beginning of the show, where you were describing your time out in Angola, and such rich detail. I'm sure the listeners will agree. You can put yourself in the frame, you can put yourself in the picture. You can almost, the level of detail you tell the story. Not only do you connect with the emotion of being within the experience, you can almost see it and hear it. You're talking about the machine guns and the planes flying overhead and bombs being dropped. You can feel like you're in the story. And I think a great speaker, in my opinion, has that ability to take people on a journey, not only emotionally but vividly, in terms of that rich detail. And I think that really is something you've certainly mastered. I know last time I saw you speak, it was such a powerful experience, because, and I was taking notes on the delivery of myself. I'm always looking out for delivery now, and as I progress this podcast, I'm now starting to listen to other podcasts, and rather than listen to the content, I'm listening to the delivery and how they're asking questions. But I think, having witnessed the way you speak, it's that richness of detail when you're taking people on a journey, and that for me is one of the most powerful transformative skills people could have as a speaker. And again, it all comes back to the points you've raised about being certain in your message and being vulnerable and being willing to be real. But I think that ability to connect with the details. So many speakers I've seen, they come across, even the message might be fantastic, but it feels rigid because the detail, they haven't gone into the richness, the texture that you can create through a powerful story.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also thank you for that. I appreciate that, and you're right. And while I'm listening to you, I'm also just thinking, it's also you've sat in an audience many times yourself, and I think you enjoy being in an audience when the speaker is actually enjoying themselves, and the speaker is enjoying himself or herself, and they are in the moment. And I think that's probably one of the toughest things to coach a speaker. And I've coached some speakers before, and it's about, hey, you got to be in the moment. You got to be right in the moment. And that's also about being able to utilize whatever comes up and being innovative, and not sticking rigidly to a structure or a script, being flexible. Flexibility is power, the more flexible you can be, the more powerful it is, because you can take the audience wherever you want them to go, right? And I think that's when, like you say, that's when it's most enjoyable. And I would agree with you about the stories. It's stories, people learn so much through stories, and I know I enjoy. That's why I've been around Tony now for 16 years, and I never get tired of hearing stories. And he often tells the same stories because he's teaching the same points. Because those stories are so clever at teaching what he teaches, but those stories never get old because the way he tells it, it's so engaging every time he tells them. And I know you've heard him more than once, several times yourself, and you've heard those stories more than once. And I think you would probably agree that you would enjoy that story the seventh time as much as you enjoyed it the first time.
Yeah, you're right.
So it's a great subject though, isn't it? Because even when it comes to one-on-one, the ability to express yourself effectively one-on-one, is the big difference between whether you get the girl or not, or get the job or not, or get the business or not, right?
Power of communication and influence.
Yeah, it is. It's such an important skill, and it's something that unfortunately we're not taught when we're young. We don't get taught that at school, and lots of people don't ever learn how to do it because it's not something that if you think about the majority of people, it's not something that would come across later in life either. Unless you actually go out looking for a course on communication, or you're looking for how to communicate effectively. It's not something that most people ever come across, and consequently, as a result of that, if you meet most people, their vocabulary is very limited, and the way they express themselves is very limited, and that's a real shame because self-expression is such a great art, and when we see it, when we see self-expression that's been mastered, right, we hang on that, we hang on every word, we watch that with absolute, we're in awe when we see someone who can express themselves in a masterful fashion, whether that's on screen or on stage,
I think the beautiful thing about speaking, though, and the art of communication is it's something that anyone can learn.
Yes.
Everyone, like you said earlier on in the interview, everyone starts at the beginning. When you're first establishing a message, you don't have to be the greatest communicator in the world, but you'll only become a great communicator if you get out there and do the work and speak over and over again. And like you did when you first got started, you were out there just speaking wherever you could, even if it was 80-year-old people who were probably in the wrong room.
Yeah, for sure.
Sharing the message, and it's just that practice and repetition and self awareness that enables you to keep growing. And I think that's a powerful point in itself.
Yeah, it is. You're right, and I think there's just you can't put money on practice. Practice. I was fortunate because what I did was I started doing a lot of corporate workshops. And I was doing a lot of short workshops, like 3-hour, 4-hour, 2-hour workshops, and eventually I was doing them every day, and sometimes I would do 3 a day. And I did that for years, like for a good 3 or 4 years, where I would do, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 workshops every week. And then I would be speaking on the weekend too. And I did that for such a long time. So, but I was loving it, because I was getting paid very well for it. And I don't speak as often as that now because I don't have to. But obviously I love to speak, and I'll speak nowadays. I'm speaking possibly once or twice a week, every week. And sometimes maybe 3 times a week. But when you're speaking like that all the time, it's just such great opportunity to practice, because then you can try different things, and you can really, and you get, the more comfortable you can be in front of an audience, the better it is. That's why I said earlier, it's about, you've got to do, if you want to speak effectively and want to be a powerful speaker who makes a difference, you've got to be somebody who's really comfortable with themselves, comfortable in their own skin, and you've got to do whatever it takes to get comfortable in your own skin in front of people. And unfortunately, if you look at speaking, I know this subject our conversation has gone on to speaking now, and I'm not sure if you wanted to go that way, but if you look at speaking, public speaking, apparently these are the figures that I've researched. 41% of people in the Western world are afraid of public speaking. That's almost half of everyone alive, right?
Yeah.
So, and most people will put the fear of public speaking above death, the fear of death, because they would just hate to be up in front of an audience, because of the fact that when they get up in front of an audience, and it's very, very similar for a lot of people, they just get in their head about how they look, how they sound, all of their own insecurities, just start coming to the forefront of their mind. And it's about getting past that. You look at some of the most powerful speakers in the world today, they're so comfortable in front of people, they're just so comfortable in front of a camera. They're so comfortable in front of an audience. They look very, very happy up there. And it doesn't matter what question you fire at them. They could take any question because they're just comfortable. They've practiced. They got to that place where they don't really care. There's nothing too hard. They're not afraid to bare their soul.
I think that comes from a couple of things, really. It's one, owning who you are as a person and owning your strengths, your weaknesses, and your flaws. And then secondly, owning your topic, owning your material, and knowing yourself and your message inside and out.
Yes, I would agree with that. Definitely. It's you just got to know your topic inside out. It's a fascinating thing. I mean, just my mind is going all over the place now that because what you mentioned. I remember seeing someone speak the other day, and they had these slides, and every slide was just so full of data and just so much information, just information overload, and the writing was so small that you couldn't actually read it from the back of the room. And I just think, wow, there must be millions of people out there doing the same thing, death by PowerPoint, as they say, which is a phrase that has been around for many years. But if you're going to present or speak to win, you've really got to master it. All the things that we both mentioned now,
Awesome. And before we go into the quick fire final round, Allan, just what's been your proudest moment as a speaker?
My proudest moment as a speaker, I would say it was is definitely standing in front of the Springboks. I think.
Wow.
I remember that day, the first day. I stood in front of the Springboks, and I was actually teaching them about.
Before you continue, Allan, for those who aren't necessarily sports fans, do you want to give a bit of context?
The Springboks is when you become a Springbok in South Africa, it's the highest honor you can get as a sportsman. You represent the country of South Africa, and although you could be a Springbok netballer, hockey player, tennis player, swimmer, runner, whatever it is, the Springboks is a nickname that's given to the rugby team, right? The Boks. And obviously being a rugby fan and growing up in South Africa, I played rugby as a youngster. And I remember I played rugby against people like Joel Stransky and Jeremy Thompson, both of them became great rugby players. Joel Stransky was in the Springbok winning a rugby team that won the World Cup in 1995. And I played against him at school, and he was just ahead of his league, right? He was from another planet. But I remember when I stood in front of them for the first time, and I was doing this session. It was a 3-hour session on physiology, wow. And how it affects your psychology on the field. And I remember, you can have two conversations at once, as we said earlier. And one of the conversation I was having internally was, oh my God, look where I'm standing. I can't believe these are the Springboks in front of me. Look, oh my God, there's John Smith. There's Albert van der Berg. It was just nuts. But at the same time, I had to keep saying, okay, be present. That was just an amazing moment. And I thought, wow. And I had several more of those moments where I did some work with them, and it was just great. And then I remember thinking, wow, does it get any better than that, really?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I think that's probably for me is probably the greatest honor I've had, because being such a great fan of the Springboks, and I developed some good relationships with some of those guys, and which continue to this day. So I'm very blessed for that experience. That was great. Yeah.
Awesome. We just need to get you in front of the England football team now.
Yeah, they've tried it with. They actually had someone who did some stuff with the England football team. It's a tough one with England. I mean, I love England, because I've been living here for so long, and if South Africa's not playing, then I'm an English fan.
Good, good to hear.
And I've always wanted England to do so much better, because they are such a great. They've always had so many great players, and it's such a. I just think they get such a bad rap from the media here in this country.
Yeah, it doesn't help.
It doesn't help, no.
All right, let's dive into the final round. So I've got 3 quick fire questions for you to wrap up today's session. So the first one is, if you had to start your speaking career from scratch, knowing everything that you know now, what would be the first thing that you would do?
The first thing that I would do if I had to start again from scratch, I think I would probably do. What would I do? I think I would go and I would do more training with Joseph Williams in America.
Wow.
Joe Williams, yeah. I think if I was starting out now for the first time, and I was all over, and I was starting my journey right now from scratch again, I would definitely take that opportunity to go and spend more time, because it would have just, I think, it's about fast tracking it, and seeking out. Yeah, I think to answer that question, I would have probably started seeking out the experts,
Mentors.
More of them right from the beginning, rather than coming to them slightly later,
That's great advice.
Yeah. making my own mistakes. I would have just gone straight to people like Joe Williams, Bob Bays, any of these guys who are teaching, speaking, teaching at a very, very high level, and gone straight to the beginning, to that training first off, and then gone from there, rather than coming to them, 2-3 years down the road after I've made my own mistakes already.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's cool. And then the next question is, what's the most game-changing piece of advice that you've ever personally received?
The most game-changing piece of advice I've ever received is nothing is ever in the way, everything is always on the way.
And how does could you explain that for me?
Yeah, the first time I heard that, I thought, wow. And I'd heard it before, but it never really, registered with me. But a friend of mine reminded me about it. He said, listen, nothing is ever in the way, everything is always on the way. And I said, yeah, I've heard that before. And he said, well, just what does it mean to you? And that was the first time I actually thought about it. And I thought, wow, what does it mean to me? It means, well, nothing is ever in the way. That means that there's no accidents in life. And I was going through a time when I was going through a divorce, a separation from my wife, and I was at a very low point. And I wasn't seeing my kids every day like I was. I was only seeing them every now and again. And it was a very tough time for me because my kids are, they mean the world to me. And I was in a low place in my life, and I remember thinking, what does that mean? Nothing is ever in the way. Everything is always on the way. And I thought, well, it means that there's no accidents in life, right? If nothing is ever in the way, then everything that happens in order to serve me, right? So that means that everything is always on the way. On the way where? On the way to, the ultimate destination, wherever that is, nirvana or, your ultimate end, your ultimate outcome. So that means that everything is always on the way to that. So if something happens, and I began to think about it, I thought, well, if something happens, that means that it's not happening to me, it's happening for me. And then the light went on. I thought, wow. And then I said to my mates, I said, listen, thanks for reminding me about that. And now I use that all the time. I always remind myself, whenever anything happens, if I don't like it, and, initially my reaction might be, I don't like this. And then I think to myself, well, maybe this is serving me. Maybe at some point I'm going to look back, I'm going to say, I'm glad this happened, and I'm glad that happened, because if that didn't happen, I wouldn't be here. So I judge it less. I judge it at a much slower speed now, I suppose. I'm less inclined to look at it and think, and if I do that, I'll just catch myself and say, well, nothing's ever in the way, everything's always on the way. So there must be a reason for this happening, and this is happening for me. It's not happening to me. This is going to serve me at some way. It's going to serve me at some point. I'm going to look back and be grateful for this. So I might as well be grateful for it right now, right?
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And the final question is, what does it mean to be unstoppable to you?
To be unstoppable. To be unstoppable means that you welcome adversity and you use adversity to grow. It means that nothing's ever going to put you down. It means that whenever anything happens to knock you down, you jump straight up and you say, right, what's next? Unstoppable means that you take whatever life throws at you, and life sometimes will throw you a very mean curveball when you least expect it. But it's having that mindset that, again, coming back to what I said 2 minutes ago, is about, it's always on the way, right? It's always serving you. You're unstoppable. Nothing is going to stop you. You'll bounce back from any adversity. And if you think about what Napoleon Hill said in Think and Grow Rich, and that great line in that book, he said, every adversity has within it the seeds of an equivalent or greater benefit. And if you think about that, it means that every adversity is serving you. And unfortunately, you know as well as I do, and I love the fact that I remember when you first told me about, developing the Unstoppable brand, and I thought, wow, I love it, because there's so many people who get stopped, they get stopped by so many different things, and they have the shot taken out of them, they have their mojo is dissipates because of the certain things that they encounter in life. And being unstoppable means that that everything is serving you and everything is making you stronger, and you will not be stopped by whatever shows up.
Awesome.
You just have a determination that you're going to make your life unfold exactly as you see it in your mind.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
I think that's how I would describe it, Joe.
That's a great definition. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome, bud. Thank you.
So the final thing, Allan, is just for the listeners. How do they reach you? How do they find out more about your work? How do they connect with you? If they want to work with you as a speaker or as a coach, how do they connect with you?
I'm on Facebook at Allan Speaks. So it's facebook.com/Allan Speaks. It's ALLAN Speaks, as you and I are speaking right now. My website is allanspeaks.com. It's currently being rebuilt. I'm actually having it changed up a bit. So at the moment, I've just got a very basic page there where people can find out about me and leave their details, etc. But I'm having the website rebuilt, and it's going to be coming back, and I can't wait for to launch again. It's going to look good. I'm excited about that because I'm going to be putting some more emphasis on the speaking and the speaking coaching, and working with speakers to become more effective speakers. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn also. So I'm not very. I use Twitter, but I'm not very big on Twitter. But I would say Facebook and LinkedIn, and all through my website.
I can personally testify, having seen Allan speak a number of times, and actually Allan and I spoke together at an event, and he gave me some very, very powerful feedback that's helped my own speaking as a result of that. So I would certainly get in touch with Allan about your speaking, and do follow through on the website as he gets that built as well. There'll be some great stuff on there.
Thanks, buddy.
Allan, thanks for your time and your insight and your wisdom and sharing your story today. It's been really insightful and some really powerful nuggets for the listeners to take away. What will happen next is on Monday, I'll be releasing a debrief of our episode, and I'll share some of the personal takeaways that I'll be experiencing. And I'd encourage the listeners as well listening today to visit the show notes over at theunstoppablepodcast.com to share their takeaways from today as well. So thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate this session. It's been a really enjoyable and powerful conversation, and I can't wait to connect again soon.
Dan, thank you, my man. Thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it, bro. It's been great. I always love talking to you, and I look forward to doing something with you again in the future, bud. We need to do that.
Wow, what an epic episode. Thank you, Allan, for making this such a powerful episode. I, for one, am very excited to get back on stage and go out there and share my message. Thank you for sharing some great tips on how to maximize your presence and impact as a speaker. I'm really excited to get back on the road and do some work myself on stage. Coming up next week, on Monday, you'll hear the recap from the show where I'll be sharing how I implement what Allan has spoken about today. And I would also love to hear about what you're going to implement from today's session. So do head over to unstoppablepodcast.com and check out the show notes and add some comments. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share it on social media. It's my mission to really help as many people as possible to unleash their greatness, build their empire, and create a life that they're proud of. And this podcast is one way of helping to do that through some of the great guests I've got on the show. So please do share the episode. Every single share and every like counts on social media. So thank you very much for doing that. And finally, if you enjoy the show, please do come and leave a review on iTunes. It means a lot to me. I read every single review on the show. And if you want to email me about for future guests and suggestions, I'd love to hear from you too. Thanks as always for being a listener of the show. I hope you got great value from Allan's session today. I look forward to the next episode. Until next time, go out there, unleash your greatness, ignite your movement, and build your empire. You are unstoppable.